Greetings again, GCE family, coming to you from my home office on April 21st, Tuesday. It's good to come before you again, even though it's on video. Just another get to know me kind of video. I guess I've been letting you know more of who I am, and it came out in the sermon this last week for those that heard it. I talked about the story where I accidentally tore up the wrong deck at a house, and it happened to be my boss's deck. For those that are interested, it was a true story. It really did happen. My boss was out of town when it happened, and I remember going to his office and trying to apologize the week that he got back, and he could not speak to me. He had me just leave. I don't think he had anything nice to say at the time, so that was part of what was going on. But I wasn't fired. I didn't lose my job. It was a summer job, and in fact, when college was over, I was offered a job for them full-time. So I continued to work summers for them and then was offered a full-time job for a brief time. So that didn't spoil that, but what an incredibly embarrassing story about how we sometimes think we know what we're talking about or know what we are aware of, and it turns out we're very mistaken. And the example for that was the disciples and how they thought they understand who Jesus was. They thought they understood, and their understanding was not correct. And that's because they didn't understand the fullness of who Christ was and what he came to do. So today, as we meet, it's not just talking about the sermon and the instances of things that have happened in my life. I wanted to reflect a bit on the reality of the difficulty that we're in and hopefully give you some encouragement. I appreciate those that have reached out and asked how we're doing. We're doing okay. It's been difficult. It's been an odd start and a hard start, but we're in this together. To me, this is the only way to start a church as a new pastor, because that's the only way I'm aware of. But I acknowledge it's a difficult time. And part of how we get through the pains and the struggles of life is by acknowledging them. But it's not acknowledging them just to tell one another of how bad things are, because, man, that gets depressing. And that's reading the news feeds every day. I think a way we look at this and remember the joy that we have in Christ is remembering that this present suffering won't always be here. And that's both in the eternal sense and also in the reality that this day, this being stuck inside, is not going to last. The day is coming when the ban will be lifted and we're going to be rejoicing to be together again in person and at the church worshiping. It's going to be beautiful. Until then, I think a way that we continue to deal with the pain and the disappointment and the hardship that we're in is both to confess the hardship, but also to acknowledge the goodness that God still is giving you. I think we don't understand pain in our lives until we've gone through it, until after it's over. Then we can look back and see the ways God has used it for good. My encouragement to you, and I'd love to hear your replies, how is it that you've seen the goodness of God in this time? What are ways that you've grown? What are ways that you've been encouraged in your faith and in your understanding of God? He is not afraid of this virus. He's well aware it is not outside of his control. This time is unprecedented. This time is unlike anything we've ever seen, but it's not the worst thing that's ever been, and nor will it be the worst thing that ever will be. And so how do we now live in the tension of the difficulty of this being really hard, and the reality that we are called in Christ to have joy in our suffering? Granted, part of that is joy in that suffering is suffering for Christ. So maybe the encouragement is learn how to suffer for Christ in this time. What can we do as Christians to go forward with the message of the hope that we have in Christ? Next week, when we meet on Sunday, we're going to continue in our sermon series in John, finishing up with our last sermon in that series on how Jesus loved his disciples to the end. And it's an ending one about belief. We're looking at doubting Thomas and the reality that he, in John chapter 16, he didn't believe until he saw with his own eyes. I think there's a lot of things in our lives that cause us to struggle to see Jesus. And so I encourage you in this time, reach out to one another. Call me. Let's talk. Let's discuss what's going on in your life that's good and what's hard, because this is not an easy time. And I'm grateful that we have the hope and the encouragement of Christ in this. I'm grateful that he takes our mistakes and he fixes them. And I'm grateful that he's not unaware of our pain and that in him we have peace.